mistake, number one, is to try to do sprints, if you like, big bursts, and then nothing. So we charge ahead and get a lot done and really throw ourselves into the process, and then find that we leave it for a while. I've talked about this before in my own case. But rather than a sprint, we need to be taking on a steady process, even if it's a small amount at a time. There's that old saying from the fable, slow and steady wins the race, except of course there's no race going on here. But still the idea of going slowly, not biting off more than we can chew. I'm really going into all the old sayings here. And having consistent small amounts of time, perhaps every day, that we spend on learning a language or languages. That's the kind of process that's going to help. The mistake is to think you can rush it all or fill up on it and then let it go, because you'll just lose everything you did in that sprint, in that burst, and have to go back over it. Okay, it kind of reminds me of two things, one of which is when I was doing French at university many years ago, and one of the things that used to put some people off taking languages was the timetabling. The way the classes were scheduled was such that you had, if you were doing French, a class every day at 9 a.m. or 9:30, or 4 days out of the 5 at least, and then say a grammar class and a conversation class at other times here or there during the week. But for most university students, that getting up to be at a 9 a.m. class most days of the working week was just not something attractive. Why did they do this? Well, because a little bit regularly is going to be better than a big burst and then nothing. That's the principle. The other thing it reminds me of is further back in time, when I was in secondary school and learning the flute. And this was probably true for people learning all kinds of musical instruments. We had a practice book that you had to take home and fill out every day, a minimum half-hour practice. And it was to be signed by your parents to attest to the fact that you really did do that practice, and brought in each week. Again, working on the idea that a little bit every day was better than doing lots all at once. Now, I and many of the other students at school would often put off the practice and leave it probably till the last night before class, and try to do the right thing by practicing the amount of time we were supposed to do, and then spreading it out across the boxes and getting our parents to sign that we really did do so many hours. But of course, since it wasn't done every day, you can be pretty sure that the difference between people like me who just played the flute and those who played superbly and those who really went ahead, really got to know their instrument, was that they were doing the daily practice rather than trying to catch it all up and get it signed off on, to fake it, if not make it. Okay. So the same principle applies with learning languages as with musical instruments and many other skills that require habitual attention. Habitual attention. It can be short bursts, but it needs to be regular. That idea of not doing the long, fast burst and then leaving a gap is connected to the next mistake that many of us make, which is impatience. Expecting something to happen overnight. Again, there are so many idioms and cliches one could dredge up here to let us know that this isn't going to work. Things not being built in a day. You didn't learn your own language, your own first language, in a day. The internet, of course, is full of people telling you that you can become fluent, whatever that means to you or to them, in a very short time, which is incredibly appealing. We're all used to the idea that, something done faster is going to be more use to us than something that takes a long commitment. But, the thing is, it isn't the same process to learn a second or a third or other language as it was your first time with your native language. But it still takes a long period to really get where you want to go. That doesn't mean you won't see any progress, but you don't expect to do everything at once. At a certain point when I was teaching in a school, a student, a year 11 student, so quite close to the end of her years of studying French, said to me, how did you get to this? She was despairing that she would get to a level of fluency by her final year. How did you get the fluency you've got at school, from school? How did you get to that level? How long did it take? And I had to say, well, how long did it take you to become fluent in English? Because the thing is that it's an ongoing process. It's not something where you become fluent and then it stops. So going back to that idea that it's not a race, if it's not a race, there's actually no finish line. Native speakers every day are still learning things about their own language, all of us. And when you take on a foreign language, that's the same. So it's harder in some ways to learn something that isn't your first language. But if we look around us, we can see that many, many people have done it to whatever degree. Many, many, many people communicate and write and enjoy their lives in more than one language. So it's not an impossibility. It's not something that we need to tell ourselves we can never manage. But impatience tends to lead us there and say, I'm never going to be there, when in fact what we mean is I'm not there yet. I could never do that. Well, the evidence is around you, all around you, that people can. The third mistake, and this is a strange kind of metaphorical one, but also literal, is not committing emotionally. It's a bit like falling in love or forming a friendship with the language, even if you're not with that language all day long. It's got to somehow be there in the background for you. It's got to be integrated as part of your life and part of what you care about. To maintain a friendship or a relationship, you have to act. It's not just about what you feel, it's about what you do. So you have to give it some care. You spend time with it, you put effort in. You could think of it as spending what people call quality time, and that's really what we need with the language as well. You might be committed to learning several languages at once. Some people find that works for them, others don't. But if you're finding you balk or procrastinate with language learning, that may mean you're better off sticking with one at a time. Don't be afraid to commit. Build on what attracted you, just as with a person, what attracted you to that language, and work with that. Think of it as time well spent, just as you would socially, because a kind of whole social world is contained in that language and expands into your life from that language. Not being afraid to commit then. And that actually brings me to the next mistake, which is another kind of fear. The fear of speaking. That's one I'm pretty sure most of us can relate to, even sometimes in our own first language. With second or further languages, it often takes the form of being fearful that you'll sound funny, or that you'll make a mistake, or that you'll sound like a foreigner, you'll have an accent, which often doesn't matter to people at all. In fact, people can find accents quite charming, so it's not something to be fearful or ashamed about. Maybe in some ways it's a bit like the fear of singing in front of other people. Even people with really beautiful singing voices can be nervous about using them in front of others because of that feeling of being exposed. So I suppose the fear of speaking, the fear of embarrassment or mistakes, well, mistakes don't matter. Most people will ignore them. If you want to be corrected, you can ask people to correct you, but usually people are fairly polite about that, so long as they can understand you. But I guess you have two choices. You can either launch with all your imperfections as they are and hope that they get better over time, or you can spend a lot of time practicing before you speak, which means you do run the risk, of course, of never actually launching. That point may never come. So these fears, I'm going to make a mistake, I'm going to dry up. Well, so what if you do? You just forge onward, and usually the other person you're speaking to will try to help in some way to fill in what it may be that you wanted to say. I'm going to sound funny. Well, of course, it doesn't sound funny to anybody who's a native speaker of that language. It sounds like their language, and you're making an attempt at communicating in it. I'm going to have an accent. Well, as I said, that's no big deal as long as you can make yourself understood. We all have different accents within our own language as well. So fear really is something we need to put aside as one of the mistakes of language learning. Easier said than done, I know. I've felt it myself, but I've also had to overcome it to make progress. From fear of speaking comes the next problem, which is actually the opposite, the not listening, or not listening to the right things. So I've already talked about how with Irish you get different sounds that can make a huge change in how a word is understood. It is used to differentiate meaning. So that makes it particularly important to listen to how native speakers distinguish between those sounds. And there are plenty of resources online you can use to listen to, but with a language like Irish or Gaelic, often the recordings, I have read, for instance, about Duolingo having recordings in which the speech is not native speaker speech, so you won't necessarily hear those. So it matters what you listen to as well, if the broad and slender consonants, for instance, are not respected. There are lots of movies and television shows online in many different languages, and if your first language is English, you can usually watch them with subtitles. That's a huge resource if you like watching films. And even if you think you aren't listening because you're getting caught up in the story, you're actually passively, in a way, becoming saturated with the sounds, especially if you repeat watch. So it's actually work that doesn't feel like work. And it can expose you to the variety of sounds or different dialects also that are out there, quite like real world speech. The last mistake I want to focus on today, which I think is very, very encouraged also by the internet, but in every walk of life also, is the over-reliance, and this is relative to what you think of them, the over-reliance on gimmicks. What do I mean by gimmicks? Well, as I say, that's totally relative to how you feel about a particular app or a particular technique or a particular product. I mean, there have always been products, textbooks or whatever, but some people love using apps and every possible prop that technology can offer. Obviously, it's useful to have sound files or discs, things that you can listen to, but you don't actually have to have every latest gadget or every latest thing that's available to help you memorize words or to help you organize your sentences or anything like that. People have managed to do this long before those things existed. So if you like them, great. If you don't, you don't have to use them, but certainly don't over-rely on them. You can spend so much time with a kind of busy work that you're not actually really moving forward. There are things that make language learning easier, but they aren't necessarily things you can buy. And of course, the world out there is always going to try to sell you something. So really see what you can manage without what I call the gimmicks before you try them and give up and say, well, language learning doesn't work, because they're only a very small part of it. So those are some of my ideas today about what can make language learning a lot harder. In another video, we'll look at what can make it a lot easier. So tune in for that. And if you enjoy what you've been hearing, or if it gives you food for thought, or you'd like to know more, think about subscribing. Thank you.